All right, I am back, and to continue with this horror show of the soon-to-arrive second Trump administration, let me get into Kash Patel. I think it goes without saying at this point that Patel, who Trump picked last weekend as his choice to lead the FBI, that Kash Patel is supremely, monumentally unqualified to direct this country's top federal law enforcement agency. Oh, my God. Talk about putting the fox in charge of the henhouse. This is madness. But do we expect anything different from somebody who is as fucked up as Donald Trump? Anyway, the people who know Kash Patel the most, this is what they're saying about him. His supervisor in the first Trump administration, Charles Kupperman, told the Wall Street Journal the other day, quote, "He's absolutely unqualified for this job. He's untrustworthy. It's an absolute disgrace to American citizens to even consider an individual of this nature." End quote. Now, this is not from it's not from a Democrat. It's not from a blue state governor. It's not from me. It's not from you. It's not from the liberals. This is from his former supervisor in the Trump administration. And by the way, this guy Kupperman, his opinion, as knowledgeable as it is about Kash, it's not an outlier opinion. In Trump's first term, according to the Times, both Bill Barr, who was the Attorney General, and Gina Haspel, who was the CIA director, the two of them, Attorney General and CIA director, went to great lengths to prevent Kash from being installed in senior intelligence and law enforcement roles. And do you know the reason why? Because they understood that he was a security threat to this country, that he was as crazy as Trump, as psychotic. Yet the selection by the orange bastard of Kash Patel stands out as probably the most dangerous selection among this whole crew of miscreants and ex-cons and felons and liars and cheats that Trump is assembling to run the country. And according to the Times, Garrett Graff, who wrote this, is a journalist and historian, and he's the author of The Threat Matrix, the FBI at War, and he also wrote Watergate, A New History, among other books. But Mr. Graff points out that the true danger here is almost less about Kash Patel and more about what it says about the orange bastard and his approach, Trump's approach, to his second term as president. There is not enough discussion, in my opinion, going on, I've said this several times, in national media, whether it's print or electronic, television, radio, whatever it is. There's not enough discussion right now pointing out by people who understand what this orange bastard has in mind. Not enough discussion to warn us. I mean, we're sleepwalking into this. This is the part that drives me crazy. You know, I see this. I know you do. I see where we're heading. It's just like this, I don't know if it's true, but the lemmings who rush over the edge of a cliff because they're inclined to rush over the edge of a cliff, right? So here we are, the American people. Here we are in the most secular holiday that this country has. Forget the Christ element of Christmas. It has nothing to do with Christ anymore. It has to do everything with buy, gimme, sell, 40% off, 50% off, run to the mall. You know that as well as I do. I'm not even going to get into it. But here we are enmeshed in this crazy capitalist holiday. And meanwhile, behind the curtain, Trump and his fascist inner circle are slowly moving forward, slowly approaching that magical day, January 20th, when they are poised, ready, and most importantly, willing, eager to destroy the Constitution of the United States. And what are we doing? Well, we're listening to podcasts, or we're watching movies on television, or we're checking out sales at Macy's. And I, under normal times, if I can use such an outdated term as normal times, but under normal times, all that'd be fine. We know what this holiday is. Let's go spend and buy and give some gifts and make everybody happy. Okay. Let's watch movies and television series and have a good time and, drink some eggnog and kiss somebody under the mistletoe and just go about our lives. But not this time, not this year. Everything is at stake. Everything in this country that you and I have taken absolutely for granted. Oh, yeah, we've known several times, well, this is under threat, that's under threat. Some of the audience of this little old podcast is old enough to remember the Senator McCarthy threats. Some of us are old enough to remember the violence in this country during protests against the Vietnam War, protests against Nixon. Some of us are old enough to remember the violence of the black civil rights, human rights movement in this country in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Some of us are old enough to remember the bad old days of the FBI when they would assassinate black leaders. So, we don't have some kind of a past that is all rainbows and beautiful fragrances. No, we don't have that. But we have always managed to come through because at one point or another, in all these various crises, we've had leadership that, whether we liked the leadership or not, managed to get us through. And we managed to get through because we refused to succumb to this cloud of fascism that seems to having been hanging over this country since forever. And I doubt if anybody is old enough to remember, who listened to this podcast, I'm not, old enough to remember the fascist threat in the 1930s, the very real fascist threat by insane fucking Catholic leaders like Father Coughlin, among others. But this time is different because the threat comes from the top of the political pyramid of power. That's where the threat is coming from. Not from demonstrators in the street, not from insurrectionists among the members of Congress, not from a radical court system. The danger, the threat is coming from the very top of the political power structure, the presidency. And never in the history of this nation has a Supreme Court ever said to a president, you are immune from prosecution. You, among the 350 million of us, you can do what the fuck you want to do and not worry about the consequences. That is one of the elements that makes this particular point in our history so dangerous, so just hovering on collapse. It's every day I question, before I open up the microphone, I question, okay, how far do you want to go, Malloy? How much do you want to talk about this threat to this country? I mean, you said things are dangerous before, Mr. Mike, and we always managed to pull back. I can remember when, on December 12th, 2000, when the Supreme Court said George W. Bush was president, and we all accepted it. We all said, okay. And Al Gore came out and made his concession speech. And that was it. We moved on. And then a year later, we had the attack in Lower Manhattan. But I remember talking about George Bush being an incipient fascist, especially when he decided to first invade Afghanistan. And then when all of a sudden he made an abrupt turn and said we were going to send massive troops into Iraq after we bombed that country into submission because, as George W. Bush said at the time, he tried to kill my dad, referring to Saddam Hussein, a former ally of ours, against Iran. Jesus Christ. And I know full well, I mean, it's in the archives. You can find it, me coming on the air and talking about this idiot, George W. Bush, and this fascist voice in his head of Dick Cheney, constantly pushing this ignorant Texan to invade a sovereign country based on total lies, deception, bullshit that everybody knew at the time. But it was only after the invasion, after hundreds of thousands of people were killed, after the very foundation of civilization, it occurred there, in the valley of the Tigris and the Euphrates. It occurred there in Iraq. And after all of that, then, oh, well, okay, there were no weapons of mass destruction, no nuclear program, no biological program, no chemical warfare program. Gee, and they hanged Saddam, hanged him, dug him out of a fucking hole and hanged him. So yeah, I've been talking about fascism for a long time in this country. That was what, 22 years ago. But there were restraints. Not that they were applied to George W. Bush. He used the War Powers Act, which is, to me, an unconstitutional act anyway. Congress is supposed to declare war, not the executive. But that's a whole different discussion, isn't it? But I remember screaming and yelling and farting and wheezing, and not just me. There were scores of us who were on the air at the time with talk shows and television shows saying, no, 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 this is madness, this is illegal, this is insane. And yet all the fuckers who brought it about skated free. And John Yoo, the most miserable fucker who worked in the Justice Department for George W. Bush, decided and declared that torture of the people we captured in Afghanistan, torture against them was not only legal, it was necessary to extract information that never amounted to anything. We still have people in prison in Guantanamo all these goddamn decades later that were put in prison, Afghan, Pakistan, the nationals, people who were put in prison in Guantanamo because George W. Bush was out of fucking control, and there were people in his administration said, yeah, go ahead, you can torture, you can invade, whatever. But this is different. The moment that we are in right now will make George W. Bush, the incipient fascist, look like a fucking kindergarten teacher. Trump is an existential threat to this country. George W. Bush wasn't, because we always knew that the court system, the Congress, would eventually rein the son of a bitch in, would make it stop. But that's gone. That's gone. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.